Hi everyone, here we are with the first stimuli of the week for week 5 for the political unit. Today we're going to look at the stimulus, break it down, see what kind of questions we can answer, and how to go about reading through these two particular bar graphs. Let's get started. So in general, we're looking at these two graphs, and of course we want to read our graphs, our tables, whatever stimuli we have. Here we're looking at these select districts in the United States and the House of Representatives in particular. And it looks like we're looking at the 2017 population and area and population density for those groups. Now we're looking at districts, so we are thinking about something political. In this case, we're thinking about voting, right? These voting districts are what we're looking at primarily here, right? In the US, we have proportional representation in the House of Representatives. And what that means is that representatives are chosen and allocated according to populations of a district or at large a state. So essentially, the more people you have, the more representatives you are allocated, and the fewer people you have, the fewer representatives are allocated. It's just to make sure that larger areas, where larger means higher, more highly populated areas, have more representation because they represent a larger piece of the United States pie, so to speak. Now, in this population, we have the population on our y-axis, of course. On the x-axis, we have some of these districts. Two of these are special because we're looking at the state at large, Delaware and Wyoming in particular at the left and right ends. And in between, we're looking at specific districts in New York, Virginia, Texas, and Colorado. Now, again, it's just things to keep in mind. Right here, we're looking at a state level. Here, we're looking at the district level. So just things in general you want to keep in mind, because these populations, while similar in number, are not similar in scale, right? That scale is different here. And that could prove to be important in the question. Now, aside from that, we want to focus on the second graph for the most part. The first one is good at telling us general populations, and here we can infer that, well, New York's 13th district, which means there's at least 12 other districts, that district alone has 802,000 plus people in that one district, whereas Delaware in its entirety, the entire state, has roughly 961,000 in its entirety. And that becomes important, more important than we might think, because then that means that for all the other 12 districts, we can assume that more than likely it's going to add up to more than Delaware itself in its entirety. Maybe just one more district, right, in New York is going to add up to more than Delaware as a whole. And that's why New York is going to have more representatives, because they represent more of the US population. And at least in terms of these democratic establishment rules that have been set into place, here where democratic is referring to the system of government, not a political party, we're looking at that representation being higher for highly populated areas compared to less populated areas. Now in our second graph, this is where this density comes into play, because now we're comparing the area in square miles to the actual density, which is really going to be people per square mile, right? That's our arithmetic density, objects per land area. In this case, the objects are people themselves. And we can see that we have very, very low densities in Wyoming, in Colorado, in Texas, and somewhat in Delaware. Delaware is kind of tricky for us here. For our high densities, we have places like Virginia and New York. Now, in general, what this is going to tell us is that in Virginia and New York, we might be looking at a more urban space, and in Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, we're probably looking at a more rural space because of these low densities, right? Rural areas tend to have low population densities. Urban areas tend to have higher population densities. Now, overall, we're thinking about voting, right, in this case. And the voting that happens in the US, at least for the House of Representatives, happens in this way. We have the census that comes out, right, that measure of US demographics, populations, where people live, ethnicity, et cetera, to get numbers of people who are living in the United States. Those numbers are used to create districts and to assign the number of representatives for a state. Right? Because if you have an increase in population, that may mean, depending on how much you've increased, you get another representative. Or if you, for whatever reason, decrease in population, your population has dropped, then you may lose a representative. Out of that process, and here at this district deciding process, there's also issues that come into play. where those districts are drawn, or through what we call the redistricting process, where we'd say we have this state and we had districts like this beforehand, or these were our districts, 1, 2, 3, 4, this should be A3, there we go. And during the redistricting process, after the census, which happens every 10 years, they have a chance to redraw that district. And I did not want to delete all of that, so I'm going to try and get everything back. Perfect, thank you. And so they can take these districts and say, you know what, we're going to still work at the same state. We're not saying we're not going to a different state, but we're going to say we still have that same area, but we want our districts to look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, too many. 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, and they want this to be the new district 2. Now we have district 1, district 2, district 3, district 4, right? Like, thinking Hunger Games and things like that. They're not quite there. And so we have this new district that's been drawn. Now this process, all of this here, is what we call that gerrymandering. Gerry, and then Mandarin, Mandering. Now the gerrymandering process is drawing these political boundaries for the purpose of favoring one political party over another. And so what that means is that maybe beforehand we had some kind of even share, right, of voters. So let's say we have these voters here. These voters here. Let's say we have these voters again over here. And we have these other group over here. Now, according to our original districts, right, these 3 colors, we should have had 2 of these dudes with districts of their own. This would have 1 district, this would have 1 district. Now that we've districted, now we've gone through redistricting for these areas, we have new districts. We have new boundaries that have been put into place, right? So we have this district down here instead. We have this district here and these districts here. So now I have kind of 1 district all by itself. I have this district that's kind of mixed, but 1 that's predominant. So this is 2 districts that they win. Here I have a win here for one of these districts, and I have another win here for the other district. And this other district here, the original color we had in the top left, they get nothing because they don't have a majority anymore. Now, naturally, according to the division that was already in place, they would have had a majority. They would have had this single space where that district would have its type of voters. Maybe they vote for this particular color, these other voters for these colors, these for these colors. Maybe they're voting on like the new highlighters they're going to be using in class or what have you. But now they don't get anything. They are big, sad right now. And that's the gerrymandering process. That's the point. All right, these other groups have redistricted in such a way that these 2 groups, instead of just getting 1 district to themselves, now they have 2. And this district, instead of getting 1 to themselves, or the original 2, they also get those 2 districts, but the other side, this last color that we have here, that group gets nothing. And that's really the point, right? Drawing these political boundaries in a way that favors one political party over another. Because if we had the original boundaries with these squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, we would have 2, 1, and 1. And it'd be at least an even representation of the population that's there. But now we have 2, 2, and none for this other group. And that's the gerrymandering process we look at. Right? And that happens, and that has to do with these processes, what's being referenced here in these charts in particular, because we are looking at districts in the House of Representatives. Now, there are other issues here in terms of like rural versus urban spaces, because we do see differences between a rural space and an urban one. So these urban spaces are going to tend to have more diversity. Just as a result of having more people, the rural spaces are going to have less diversity. Just as a result of having fewer people in those spaces, right? And that just has to having to do with population density and population distributions. Now that's also going to have other matters concerning constituents, right? The ways that different groups are going to connect with rural or urban voters. There may be other issues that are at play, right? So in urban areas, they may have more diversity initiatives because you have to accommodate larger groups of people who have more variety of cultures, ethnicities, and histories. In the rural space, that may not be as much of a direct concern, although it should be one because you want to celebrate the diversity that's present in places. Because there's maybe one majority group in that space, whatever that majority group happens to be. And so there's other tie-ins here to the kind of urban or ruralness of an area. Again, the big process you're looking at here is gerrymandering. That's at least the upshot of a lot of this. And that's what we really look at in redistricting in certain cases, like in Texas, especially in Texas. We're looking to correct some of the gerrymandering that's occurred. But it all starts with that census. We get more information about the population. That creates the districts. And all at once, we can also redistrict. Now, redistricting isn't a bad thing on its own, right? That itself can be a positive. It can be a good thing to redistrict. So we looked at the gerrymandering case, right, where we had the one situation like this, and we had the other situation like this, and we ended up with these kind of bad or unfair distributions of voting district. Now, we can redistrict for other purposes too, because let's say we had, right, our originals like this. And we have groups like this one. And I forgot to, I know I'll just use these because I haven't used this one yet. Right. And we had another group here. And, you know, we can say that we have all this. Or we'll just say that it's all one color. This is all like the all, I said all a lot. This is the entire population of this particular state, let's say, right? Let's say it's Colorado because it's roughly Colorado shaped. But now over the years, over these last 10 years, that's when we do the census, we've seen these increases, right? Like this. We've seen increases over here, increases over here, increases over here. So now we don't have enough districts to represent the total population. So we have to go to a new space. And instead of having these 4 districts like we did before, maybe now we need to have 6 districts to correctly represent the population because we have so many more people. And because we have so many more people, we also have more regions that can be represented by the districts and that need to be represented by more representatives at the state government and then at the federal government. So maybe here you ended up with 4 representatives. Here you're going to end up with 6 representatives. And that's just a change of the population, right? The population increased, so we had to represent that change with an increase in representatives. Again, proportional representation for the US, the more people you have in a state or in an area, a political district, the more likely you are to have a representative